Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Sped Talks with me, your host Donna Steele. I know last video that I did a few months ago, I did say we would not resume Sped Talk until the start of the new school year, which would be August, September. However, I had a few people who hit me up in my DMs and made a suggestion that they would like to see me tackle test taking skills or some tips for test taking, as well as, summer loss and how to prevent summer loss. So I'll be doing two videos. This is the first of the two videos that I'll be doing. And in today's video, I'll be focusing on test taking tips. 6 very simple tips, not strategies, but tips. As you know, we're dwindling down to the end of the school year. And with that, we are faced as parents as well as students with taking those exams, those summative exams. And what do I mean by summative? As the word suggests, it's a summary of everything that we would have learned that's going to be put on a test to see what we have learned, if anything, given the crazy year we've had. So let's just delve into these tips. The first one is preparation. Make sure your student or your child is prepared. And what do I mean by that? No, I don't mean the night before or the day before your child is just taking up the book and preparing for the test. No, I mean, make sure you would have already known the expectation at the end of the year or the end of a semester or the end of a term. We know that children are taught, then there are tests. Some schools, we know that it's every 6 weeks. Some schools, we know that it's every 9 weeks. So with that in mind, you want to have your child prepared by doing their homework, by doing their school projects, by making sure they do work in class, by making sure they review at night, not waiting until the test is upon us. Then we making the necessary preparation. That has several implications. One of them is our children becomes overly anxious, and we don't want to send them into a test feeling that way. So you want to prepare over time to make sure your student or your child is able to go into a test and show what they have learned. Now, don't wait until the very last minute. So as parents, you know what you would need to do based on your specific situation with your own children, what measures you would need to put in place to ensure that they're prepared to sit a test. And that might look like maybe they need a tutor. These are things that you would have known before the night of the test. So let's not wait until the night of the test. Let's not procrastinate. So first tip, prepare. Number 2, something I like to call comfort zone. What do I mean by this? Now, a lot of our students, especially special needs students, they have what we call an IEP, an individual education plan, as well as with that plan comes the necessary accommodations that student will need based on their specific or individualized needs. So the plan pretty much outlines comfort zone for taking tests or assessments. So the accommodation, that list outline the comfort zone for those students who have a disability and have a plan. Now, for students who don't have a plan, this is where dialogue becomes important. And this is where you will have to, as the parent or the guardian or whomever is in charge of the child, you want to talk to your child's teacher to let the teacher know what your child's comfort zone is and what your child requires to do well on an assessment. You would like, and I'm not saying you do this again the day before. This is where preparation comes in. You would have to be having these dialogues with the school or your teachers or whoever to let them know, well, Johnny doesn't do well when he's sitting at a desk in a rigid manner to sit a test. I've noticed this. Is it possible that we could put Johnny on the floor? Maybe Johnny likes to sit on the floor and would do better. Maybe that would make him comfortable. Is it possible if Johnny, gets seated near the window where some air is coming in? Things of that nature. So you want to have these dialogues with your school and teachers by extension to talk about what makes your child comfortable and how, if possible, the child can be accommodated in that regard. Now, when I speak about this, I'm not saying you're going to come up with things that are completely cannot be facilitated. I'm not saying that. You want to be very mindful. A student who has an IEP legally, those things can be done. Now, while a student who doesn't, the school doesn't have to make allowances based on your request to ensure your child is comfortable. But you want to kind of have a good relationship enough. It sounds bad, but you want to kind of have a good enough relationship and ensure that dialogue is ongoing so that you can tell your teacher, or your child's teacher rather, what makes him or her comfortable while doing a test. And if possible, if we can facilitate it, if they can facilitate it, that would be great. Now, you don't want to make, as I said before, you don't want to make those crazy demands. For example, Johnny would do well if he did this test at home with me. That will not happen. So again, you want to make those demands that are actually feasible as it relates to making sure your child is comfortable when he or her, is sitting a test. When he or she, rather, I said he or her, is sitting a test. 3, movement breaks. What does this mean? For those parents who have students with IEPs, you would know what this is, especially if your child requires multiple breaks or movement breaks or whatever it is called. But for me, movement breaks, I feel like regardless of an IEP, a movement break is necessary, especially for those long tests that span over 2 hours, those time tests that span over 2 hours. I think or when you have multiple tests throughout the day, I feel like your brain needs a break. And I feel like this becomes something that shouldn't necessarily be a choice, or it should be what is. So, sometimes you take a break and you walk to the restroom, you drink some water. That could work wonders for students, especially those who struggle with anxiety and oftentimes need to move about. Are those students who have ADHD or just they have those problem focusing? That little movement break could be the difference between how the child performed on a test, if they got it and if they didn't get it. So movement breaks, that would be a suggestion. And you would know your student. And for teachers, I feel like this is the way to go in terms of put that plan when you're planning your lessons. Make sure there's a movement break or a brain break. Some people call it a brain break. I know students with autism, for me, I have had students who, when they get those brain breaks, it works wonders. In terms of the results of what they are able to produce after getting a brain break, as opposed to when they don't receive it. My 4th tip is make sure they have a good night's sleep. You don't want to know that your child has a test the following day and they're going to their beds at midnight, at 11 o'clock, especially for the little ones. You don't want to do that. You're setting them up for failure. You want to make sure they're well rested. And I would say make sure they have a good breakfast. But for me, I've realized that I don't eat when I'm taking a test. So I can't say that, some kids probably that's the time when they don't want to eat, because then they become so anxious and then other issues can arise. I've seen where kids throw up on the day of a test. I don't eat until until the test has been completed. So I'm not going to put that in there, but a good night's sleep is very important because you don't want your child to fall asleep in the test. You're tired, and especially if you're tired and you really don't want to do this test, you put your head on the desk, and before you know it, the time is up and you got nothing done on the paper. So a good night's sleep, you want to make sure they're well rested, their brains are rested, and they're ready to go for the next day. My fifth tip, this is 5 out of 6. My fifth tip, remind your students or your child to take time. Remind them to look for cues or clues, as well as remind them to answer all questions. So this one tip encompasses 3 parts: taking their time, looking for cues or clues, as well as to answer all questions. This is a big one. And this, in some cases, can be broken down to be test-taking strategies. But just remind your students, take your time. Explain to them why it's important to take your time. Because when you don't take your time, you become flustered and you start to make unnecessary mistakes. So we want them to take their time. You want them to look for cues or clues, especially when they have come across a response that they don't have any idea how to respond to it. This is where now, whether through process of elimination, looking for something in the directions that's going to give them an indication of what the question is asking or how they should respond to the question. This part becomes very important. You want to remind them to answer all questions. By doing that, it improves their chances of scoring well on a test, rather than deciding that I'm just going to answer those questions that I know. And with reminding them to answer all questions, you want to remind them to bubble accordingly. So if it's a multiple choice and you have a bubble there, make sure they fill out the bubble well. So these are things, again, that goes back to preparation. You want to help them to prepare for a test by ensuring they know how to bubble, by ensuring they know how to look for cues and clues. Preparation. So tip number one is tied to number 5. You want to, so over time, you will be making these reminders so that eventually it sticks in the brain and it becomes a second nature. So remind them to bubble, remind them to erase. When they're erasing, it's clean. Remind them to look for words and clues that can help them to respond accordingly to their questions. I don't know why this is happening. My screen just keeps going back and forth. I don't know if you will see that in my recording, but it was just going back and forth. So you want to remind them of those things. And in doing so, it has a lot to do with preparing them for taking the test. And number 6, which is the last one, you want to set the tone for the day. What do I mean by setting the tone for the day? Don't remind the child that, oh, you have a test today, and freak out the child. The child knows he or she has a test. They know. What you want to do in setting the tone, you want to remind them to do their best. You want to have them laugh as much as possible. So you probably want to crack a little joke in the car on the way to school or on the walk to school. Or if you're not the one who takes your child to school, you want to have a nice little dialogue the day before and kind of break the ice, because they're already nervous even if they're not saying it. Probably want the child to play a video game the night before, kind of amp up the child, get him or her happy about it, not cramming the night before the test. You want to be as light as possible. You want to let them feel as light as possible. Funny stories. The most I would say that you should say to them about the test on the morning, just say, remember what I told you, do your best. Your best is good enough. Give them some positive affirmation. Let them know you believe in them, and you don't even have to do that on the day of the test. If you keep their preparation before now, reminding them that their best is good enough, and remind them that when you do take a test, the test is to see what you have learned, as well as to see how well your teachers have imparted the knowledge, and not so much that test always even show us what you've learned. Sometimes the test has no relationship to what you've learned. And those are bad tests, of course. But sometimes they don't really even show you how much you've learned. So just remind them that doing their best and ensuring that they do what you would have talked about before now is all that matters. And yeah, those are my 6 tips. Now, if these are not specific enough to what you might be looking for of test taking tips and strategies, just shoot me a message or a DM or an email or a DM and let me know, and I will give you things that are specific to what exactly you're looking for. But these are general tips that can work with any student, not just special needs students. So again, remember, this is the first of 2 videos that I will be putting out. So until next time, this is Donna Steele saying, see you later.